Right. Welcome back to the In Progress podcast. Your host, Miles Madge. Before we introduce our guest today, which will be my dad, wanted to make a couple announcements about our social media pages. Got our Instagram up now. In Progress KC is where you'll find that at. TikTok is up and running as well. YouTube as well will get frequent videos put out. Got some good content coming your way. And before we introduce our guest once again. Topic subject today will be more gravitated or surrounding societal issues. Of course, my dad has lived a little more life than me, so we'll get a comparison on things that he may have experienced in his childhood versus what I'm experiencing now. But yeah, Dad, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, you bet. I am Derek Madge. I am a middle-aged man. I'm Miles's father. I like to think of myself as a knower of all things. Of course, until someone comes along with more information and debunks whatever it is I think, and then, they put me in my place. However, I'm not afraid to make a foray into various subject matters, which is what we're going to be doing here, it sounds like.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I thought you'd be a great guest for today's podcast because you come with very impactful, insightful information. I think the viewers would gain a lot of knowledge from your knowledge, and we don't get a lot of time to sit down and talk one on one. So I think it'd be beneficial to us to record our conversation and also get the viewers something to see as well. But yeah, without further ado, I always start the podcast out by asking, what does progress mean to you in your own words?
Progress, what does it mean to me in my own words?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question. Um, I think in terms of if I'm defining that in terms of personal progress, it's being more informed today than I was yesterday and striving to be more informed tomorrow than I will end today, if that makes sense. I know that probably sounds clichéic, but that to me is progress. You're taking in more of the world around you. It should, in theory, make us more well-rounded, empathetic individuals, better able to contribute to society.
I think so too. I think so too. And the perspective and the take you kind of had on, working the day for tomorrow and things of that nature. I think that's a perspective that a lot of people lack. I think that also kind of hinders people's progression as well. But progression is subjective to everybody, although or subjective to everybody, although there is an objective sense of what that word means. But I totally agree. And kind of ties into our subject matter today as well. Like I said, societal issues and things of that nature. I do want to ask, about our social media crisis currently. Of course, you're on social media. Uh, this is something new within our generation and something we're adapting to. And I think it's a big piece of the new world we're adapting to after COVID in particular. How do you think that'll affect mental health with the younger generation and progression in that sense?
Very good question. A lot. For starters, I think it's going to affect mental health a lot directly with people generationally speaking that are your age and no doubt younger, because you all are certainly more immersed in it than say someone my age, where I use it more or less oftentimes for business or for something specific. If someone says, "Hey, we did X, Y, or Z. We took a trip. Um, your aunt and uncle took a trip. Hey, you want to see? You need to see these pictures. Go to our page, and you can see them." So, really, more along the lines of that. One of the things, though, that I think about as you're asking me that question, there's a person who does a one of the news shows, and he recently wrote a book, and the book is centered around how people's attention is constantly being competed for. And that's one of the things that I think about when it comes to social media, particularly young people, anyone, but particularly young people who are bombarded by things where the algorithm is designed to go after you and to really compete with your attention for things in terms of and compete for it with things that are far more important. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's really what I. So that's one of my primary concerns, and then not being able to tear themselves away from it. Young people, that is, you know. So
Right. Right. And it was kind of shoved in our face as well. Of course, I think there's always a good way to do something and a bad way to do something. Do you feel like with social media, um, and its effects being more negative than positive, do you ever think that, we'll make a turning point to use this software to allow us to progress, allow it, or versus allowing it to be a hindrance to us?
yes, I do, and I think that's happening. Um, to some degree already. Certainly, businesses use social media for reviews. I am a big reviewer. I read reviews because if I'm going to go to a restaurant or if we're vacationing, I would much rather get the input and insight from someone else, from a consumer perspective, a consumer point of view,
Right.
and certainly that takes place whether it's on Google, Google reviews, and then there's others, but typically I tend to gravitate towards Google. And to reciprocate, I too will provide reviews because, I mean, you know me, I will give my unsolicited opinion if I'm not happy with something. So I certainly feel like that if someone does or a company does a good job at something, then I should also give my unsolicited opinion. So in that regard, I think that there is good. So you know, I don't think that it's all bad. I just think that overwhelmingly, it's the social part of social media, not so much the business part of social media that really gets the attention and really is where people are fixated on and doom scroll, if you will.
Mm. Right. Right. And that leads me to my next question with things that I see in anecdotal um, evidence that I have day to day with Gen Z being a lot of my friend group. I think that a lot of people equate their personal value to likes, to subscribers, to comments, to overall engagement. Um, my question is, being that that's how we kind of operate now, the younger society, in comparison to how you grew up, was there something similar to that? Was there something similar to having likes or comments or follows that made people's value seem inflated, almost taking them out of like the social norms?
Very good question again. The short answer is no, kind of. So, as a for instance, when we were younger, think junior high slash middle school, high school age. And if you decided to run for, if you ran for homecoming king or homecoming queen, or if you ran for student council, you would make physical posters and you would hang them up. You'd hang up banners. I'm certain that kids probably still do that today, and it probably has a QR code on there as opposed to a pocket with a pamphlet. So if people wanted more information, so it was all hard copy. You interacted with folks directly, verbally.
Right.
You would have a carve out where you would there'd be an assembly, and the candidates would be able to give their speech and make their pitch per se. So the required human interaction, that was the way that it was done, as opposed to now, which obviously is a huge difference. You know what I mean? Not to say that, hey, we all grew up, we weren't afraid to engage in public speaking. I'm sure some people were scared beyond words. However, we did it. And if you were going to vie for the quote unquote likes for student council office or homecoming king or queen or whatever, that was something that you had to do.
Right. Right. So it seems like more of an earned effort versus something that, you're just getting attention wise because of your presence. I don't really know how to phrase that question, but um, yeah, I definitely understand what you're saying. Uh, it's interesting take too because I feel like we're not familiarized with a lot of what you guys grew up with, and being that we're going through this change with technology and learning how to adapt with communication in that aspect, we've lost the art of communicating like normal human beings. And when we do, it's kind of a sense of fear to go out and make new connections or build with person to person. How would you overcome some of those negative stipulations of too much social media, not necessarily technology?
Not very good way to put it. Depending upon what you're using it for, if one is using it as a crutch, as a for instance, um, you could be out, and as opposed to introducing yourself to new people. This is how we met. This is how we met girls. You would have to talk with them. You'd have to introduce yourself to them. You would have to understand what it was to respect someone's personal space, especially when that someone was a female, because you wanted her to know that you liked her, to you were allured to her. I hope that's not too strong of a word. At the same time, you didn't want to invade their personal space, that sort of thing, and create create the feeling that you're a threat, that sort of a thing. So those are things that went into it, that went into the thought process. You know, you'd observe, you would see whom that person was with, you would try to make eye contact, and so all kinds of different things. Whereas now, you know, you pick up your device, I'm presuming, and you private message them, you inbox them. I know that there's all kinds of slang and vernacular that
Right.
gets used, but it's something like that, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you're basically you're behind the keyboard, you
Right.
know.
Right.
So I mean, it was direct interaction. About the most distance you could put between yourself and someone who you wanted to meet was if you all had a mutual acquaintance or a mutual friend. Hey, can you let her know I'm interested in her? That
Right.
sort of a thing. Or as an adult and you're networking and you're doing these things in person, oftentimes if there is someone at a company, a point of contact, and you're like, hey, I've heard of this person, I'd really like to meet them. You keep in mind people who have a common connection between you and them, and then you ask them to introduce you. You know what I mean?
Right.
And you make sure that you're dressed appropriately and that you're groomed properly and that your breath is fresh.
Mm.
You know, all of these different things that come along with meeting someone in person. So I think that right there, if there was something we could do, your question started off, things we could do without social media, that would be it. I would recommend having, say, for instance, a school sponsored social event, and you don't pay to get in,
Mm.
but you can't bring in your device.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Can't bring in your device. Uh, and then I would do, with the school officials, I would do a good job of facilitating and igniting the interaction between everyone. You know
Right.
what I mean? That sort of thing, just to be able to spur human to human interaction. Rather, you know, there were subject cards or everyone got a different colored name tag and it meant something. Just anything is a catalyst to be able to drive direct human to human interaction. I think that would be very interesting
I think it would be
and
too.
benefits. You know.
Absolutely. And I think getting back to the basics would allow us to get back to where we once were. It's funny because when you address a lot of those issues, it starts at one basic point that you think like, oh, we'd be able to fix it with this, like a social mixer. Nobody brings in their phones and things like that. But the lost art of mannerisms and social cues and people picking up on those things, that's just one of the many issues of the overuse of technology and using it as a crutch, like you said. But that's something I thought about too. Once again, going back to the basics, starting with something like a mixer of sorts, no technology, and just letting conversation flow from there, and being in a state that we once were operating in. So yeah, that's really good insight. Like I said, you always bring some knowledge and impactful knowledge as well. So with that, I'll segue into kind of like the same segment here, but with the 9 to 5 job, do you believe that's dead as far as what we can do with social media and the things at our hands?
I think that's more of a technological question with work from home being what it is now, which really was heightened after COVID. You remember you were still home during COVID. I believe you came home from school
Yep.
during COVID, and so you all were home. Mason started kindergarten. Um,
Mhm.
Malia came home. So that was a completely different thing. And the tools of technology really helped us through that because I began working from home. Your mom was working from home. So we're all there. And the tools of technology really allowed us, enabled us to be able to do that. And then post COVID, we had people had a chance to get off the hamster wheel and they saw what it was like to be able to work from home and have more of a work life balance. And at that point, I really think that that's what started like, yeah, I'll go back, but not completely. You know what I mean? I credit your generation with helping set the tone. It's funny. I was working for a big company at the time. I work for a big company now, but I was working for a different Fortune 100 company. And some of the people that were around my age, some of the senior sales folks and some of the engineers who had been around a while, the rub that they would have against your generation. Oh, these guys don't want to work. These kids don't want to work. And it finally dawned on me like, no, they want to work. What they're not going to do is they're not going to do certainly what my parents did. 40 years, one company, go to work sick, doesn't matter. Miss kids, miss the school plays, miss basketball games. You know, my dad leaving at 2 a.m. to get to work at 3 a.m. That sort of thing, to work a 12 or a 15-hour day and really pour themselves into it. They had an opportunity to get off the hamster wheel. And when it comes to quality of life, that's just something that your generation, and I credit your generation with that. And I had to remind my colleagues, like, hey, guys, this isn't us. We're not the reason why we have this flexibility. We would have fallen into line and just showed back up 40, 50, 60 hours a week and just kept going from there. So, how that relates to social media, I think that's more of a technology thing. How it relates to social media is just the instantaneous information. It's something that just blows me away
Right.
constantly. And I
Me
work
too.
in tech, but that blows me away.
Mhm. Right. And then you hear some people kind of relating it to getting an education almost. You hear people say, I've learned more from a TikTok or Instagram than I have in school. Um,
Just
yeah, what,
worry.
yeah, yeah. It's very worrying. And it becomes kind of like not as far fetched as you think as we progress further into our technological kind of society that we're shifting into. But yeah, it is worrying to say the least for sure. And also, I mean, with saying that, we're kind of shifting um, our focus on certain jobs uh, that the younger generation are acquiring versus the older generations. Do you think it'll leave the more important jobs like farmers, factory jobs, and things that align with that um, at lack of employees or at lack of work? Do you feel like that'll kind of turn around and bite us all in the behind?
I think that change has been going on for quite some time. I think it was George H.W. Bush. Now I'm really dating myself and putting my age out there. So George H.W. Bush, who said during his first annual term as president, said that hey, by the year 2000, we're going to be a primarily a service economy, which obviously we are right now, despite the fact things that are going on within our country to try to bring trade back to America, which I don't really think will materialize because we're not geared towards doing manual labor per se, like real manual labor, not the kind of manufacturing where it's high tech manufacturing. We're just not geared toward doing that. Other countries, namely China, does it. They do it efficiently and effectively, and certainly cheaper than it can be done here. And despite all the musings we might have about the quality of things that come out of China, that's where things are made. And I don't really see that changing much. What I do see are some jobs being made easier, being enhanced, and some even eliminated with the interweaving of AI into workflows. And it really is it's very interesting because you still have baby boomers who are retiring in droves. You have Gen Zers who are coming online. I mean, I think I don't know what's like a million Gen Zers a day turn 18, something like that.
Right.
So you have that going on. You have with the intersection of artificial intelligence. So I think it's really an interesting time in human history, particularly in labor forces and what that's going to look like, not just here in the United States, but globally within the next 10, 15 years.
Mhm. Right. Sooner than we know. Sooner than we
Yeah.
know. Right. And we're seeing the beginning effects of that, I believe.
Mhm.
Um, and then, something that's been on my mind that you said earlier in the conversation about relationships. You went out and met a girl. You went out and you were displaying those positive social cues to make her feel comfortable, invited, and things of that nature. With dating apps and relationships, intimate relationships, well, of course, you're married now to my stepmother, but uh, how do you see communication between men and women in the next 5 years? Do you think it's dwindling because of the effects of dating apps, or do you think it has the opposite effect?
Wow. I because I am married, and in that regard, in terms of eligible single people,
Hmm.
um, as far as direct interaction being the basis of their first interaction and how they get to know each other, that sort of a thing. Since I'm not in that ecosystem anymore, I don't know. I would have to think
Mm.
that I would be concerned over the next 5 years. And that's just really giving away that people communicate in general. I can take into consideration, for instance, the way that young people communicate with people who they know,
Yeah.
their friends, their family, and how much of that is done via social media or electronically through text, as opposed to in person. Oftentimes I'll get an email from someone, and it's in the text shorthand. They're emailing as if they're limited to 160 characters, so they're not even making. So that switch isn't going on. Um, so when I think about that, and then certainly the nature of an email tends to be different because you do have more characters. Oftentimes, a lot of it is geared toward specific communication, business communication. So you, it's inherently going to be more formal than text. However, people aren't making that switch. So to think that in 5 years, that some sort of a way, people will know, like, oh, I need more direct interaction and to talk
Yeah.
to. Geez, I don't know, man. It is concerning to
Yeah.
me.
It looks a little grim.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think so as well. I
Hmm.
think so as well, especially being at the forefront of it. Like you said, that question probably wasn't, or it wasn't necessarily geared towards you, being that you're married, but
Wrong.
of course,
No,
yeah,
but I get it. I
yeah,
get it.
yeah. No, that was a pretty spot on take from how a lot of men feel. As I'm a man, I can kind of speak for what I'm seeing, and what's being talked about in the media and things like that. But yeah, no, definitely a take I agree with. Uh, of course, I think within the next 5 years with dating apps, um, people will realize, although they are getting all these matches or all these options, that doesn't necessarily equate to having any good options or any options that'll value you. That's kind of my take on that. Sometimes it's like a trash can, but
Yeah. Is that really, it is like a trash can.
oh yeah, oh
So
yeah,
what is it kind of like Zip Recruiter? You put in your profile and it sends you all these shitty ass insurance sales jobs. You know what I mean? When
exactly,
really you're, like perhaps you're looking for a job as a Python programmer, but because you have some sales experience, oh, you can go work for ABC Insurance,
exactly,
bullshit, whatever.
exactly like that.
Is that how it is?
That's exactly the way it is. They compile your information and then they get you with the most liked candidates, but all the candidates don't seem to quite align.
Wow.
But yeah, it goes back to the option of, or uh, my opinion with having a lot of options doesn't necessarily equate to having any good options. And I feel
Huh.
particularly bad for the ladies as well because
Yeah.
there's a bunch of men out there, and we hear about men in the
Sickos.
media that, yeah, sickos for the
Fucking
lack of better
sickos. Yeah.
words. Yeah,
Yeah, and I've thought about that too. What that has to be like, where you're not there in person, so you can't see them. You can't see how they move. You can't see their idiosyncratic behaviors on
right.
display. You can't see the kind of people who they're hanging out with. So it really does. What's funny is during March Madness, your uncles and I will go to Johnny's on their back patio and we'll watch
Right.
basketball. And we go out there on the back patio because there's a fire pit and we can smoke cigars. And there's usually other people our age because sometimes your stepmom will go, or your aunts have gone, and there's other guys back there our age, black, white, whatever, and they'll have their wives with them. And there's been several times, countless times, where I'm back there and I struck up a conversation with some guy's wife, and it's above board. Heck, I know she's married because I'm of an age where you can see a woman wears a wedding ring, and that's what. But I'm married. But anyway, so we're having perfectly reasonable conversation. Her husband comes along. She introduces me to her husband. I introduce my wife to her husband. Yeah, and people were just talking. We're just interacting. And some of the other patrons who are out there who are much younger than us, they'll kind of give us looks, kind of like, "Oh, I wonder how these people know each other." And it's like, well, the answer is we don't.
Yeah,
But this is why you're social. When Jerry would say, like, "Hey, you want to go somewhere and watch the game?" Absolutely, let's go somewhere and watch the game. And you can count on the fact that we are going to meet people, not like we made a plan, so we're meeting this group of people, but no, we are going to meet people for the first time. That's part of the experience. Um, you know,
yeah, absolutely. And that ties into another kind of odd thing that I've encountered in relationships or I've seen in media or even real life, with having a couple, say you're going to dinner, you strike up a conversation because, like you said, you're going to run into people and have conversations, not necessarily meeting up with a specific group of people, but that's just the human nature of people. You go out to a restaurant with your significant other, you sit down, you strike up a conversation with the opposite sex, and it's the immediate thought is, oh, well, this is wrong because you're with me and you don't communicate with the opposite sex and things like that. That's another thing that I think is hindering progression with communication in the younger generation and things like that. What would your take be on that and the overall outlook of somebody who kind of operates in that mindset?